So I mentioned that I work with somebody at NASA Ames Research Center who's also on the CR board. And some of the types of things that we're interested in working on is really how do we develop systems that are able to operate by themselves in space. So think about, let's say you develop a cool robot that moves around here on Earth and you can kind of go and play around with it, or maybe it doesn't behave exactly how you want it to, but you're able to kind of go quickly and change and maybe alter the code or change the different type of hardware that it's interfacing. Adam mentioned like there's a hardware and software side of things, and you're really able to kind of iterate on that here on Earth to make a robot that you want to design to do how you intend for it to work. But when you have something like an environment like space, where once you kind of send it up, you really know that you can do about it. You really need to make sure that when you're developing these hardware and software systems, that it's able to do the things you want it to do, the word autonomously. And so this kind of question on autonomy and how do these robots and systems behave on their own are some of the things that we work on at NASA, and me particularly love working on different robots and health management tools. So recently, you might have seen the launch of Artemis II a month or so ago. I was working on fault diagnostics and sensing for that
Let's go.
system, specifically for that mission, and also looking at future missions. And so, what we're looking at is how do you develop different sensing architectures or different ways to do distributed or spread out sensing so that you can make sure that the crew of the astronauts in the rockets are staying nice and healthy throughout the entire of the mission. Another cool thing I've been working on is also on the robotics side. So let's say the astronauts get to the moon. How do we know that they are going to places that are interesting for them to go and do exploration in science? So one of the missions that I've worked on is called Viper, and it's a robot that's a rover that's going to the dark side of the moon. And there's a lot of potentially ice water on the dark side of the moon. And so, how can robotic systems like the rover Viper that we're developing actually go and look for this ice before astronauts ever even arrive? And you might think, oh, Artemis is going to the moon, Viper is going to the moon, but there's actually a place a lot closer called the International Space Station, in which really a lot of the science that we know about space really kind of happens today. And the last thing I'll touch on is there's my favorite project I've ever worked on was on this little cube-sized robot called Astrobee, which is a robot on the International Space Station. And this robot does, tasks for astronauts, works alongside astronauts on the ISS. And specifically, what I was working on is developing new kind of end effectors or hands for these robots to do even more things with astronauts on the International Space Station. So whether it's free flying in orbit, on the ground, or on the surface of the moon, or even flying around the moon like Artemis II, a lot of the work that I've worked on and the guy named Jeremy, who was in the Calculus Roundtable board, really just saying, how do we make space exploration more accessible? How do we make it more autonomous and capable? And NASA's main mission is failure is not an option. So that's like kind of when we go into designing and engineering these systems, we always try to think, might it fail? How might our designs fail? And how do we make sure we develop hardware and software solutions to overcome that? So yeah, those are some of the things I work on at NASA.